Hey everybody, my name is SPAZ and I'm a CD junkie. On this episode, I'm going to talk about a band that literally changed the way that I listened to music. But let's turn the clocks back a little bit to the late 60s. I was an AM radio listener alongside my folks, and we'd hear their record collections like the Beatles and the Monkees and Glenn Campbell and Neil Diamond. You know, we grew up with that kind of stuff. And then during the 70s, we started hearing things like the Osmonds and Jackson 5 and started getting into that. Bo Donaldson, the Haywoods, and Don McLean, American Pie. You know, all these things were really having an effect on us, you know, solo Beatles stuff. But roughly about the mid-70s, my sister Dana got into Queen. And of course, then I'd start hearing Killer Queen on the radio, and then Bohemian Rhapsody and You're My Best Friend, and things like that. Of course, I was totally intrigued. So I would spend time listening to Queen, but I really didn't know too much about them unless I read it in People magazine or something. And then one night while I'm watching TV, they say that the following Friday night, they're going to have some video show. This is a few years before MTV. So they're going to play videos by Queen. So, of course, it was a Friday night. I wasn't going to school the next day, so it was a stay-up night for us kids. So I stayed up and I watched this show. And oddly enough, it was hosted by Leon Russell. So here's this guy sitting at the piano. He's got this long, flowing blonde or gray hair, this long beard, and you know, he's all dressed up, and you know, he's saying, tonight we're going to play Queen videos. But before that, check out this song by whoever. And then all of a sudden the Clash comes on, and I'm going, whoa, this is that punk rock stuff I've been hearing about. So of course I was really intrigued because I love to reach out, because I know that there's something outside of what I'm listening to that I'm going to love. So I'm constantly searching for something new. Even back then, that I heard the Clash was playing, and I'm going, whoa, that's kind of cool. This is punk rock. I wasn't enthralled totally by it, but I enjoyed it. And then Kate Bush comes on with Wuthering Heights, and of course, you know, I'm thinking, ooh, kooky. And by the end of the song, I fell in love with her. And then The Jam came on, and I sat there and I just stared at the TV screen. And I couldn't believe what I was hearing, because here was this punk rock stuff I'd been hearing about, but they're playing Rickenbacker guitar, Rickenbacker bass, and they're dressed in suits and ties. And I'm thinking, hell, this is the frickin' punk rock Beatles. And I was floored by it. Absolutely floored. So the next day, I took my allowance, went to Licorice Pizza, which was a chain store at that time, and bought This Is the Modern World, which was their newest album at that time. Now, the videos that they played were not from this album. The videos they played were from the first album. But this is the only album that they had in stock. So, boy, I was blown away by this. Melodic, it was energetic, it was frenetic, it was just all over the map, but it was pure, clean, melodic rock music. You know, much like the Kinks, the Beatles, the Who, stuff like that I'd heard on the radio or in my parents' record collection. I fell in love with it, and I needed to own everything by this band. So I went out and I bought their first album on the next allowance. Now, this is a slightly different cover. This is the one that comes in the box set. But In the City was their first album. Didn't blow me away. A lot of great songs like In the City, Art School, I Got By in Time, Away from the Numbers. But it was a little more raw, and I really loved sort of the clean, punchy sound of this album. This is the Modern World. It was a lot cleaner, a lot more melodic. Over time, of course, I grew to love this album, but this is the album that really sold me on the band. And from that point on, any band that I saw in the bins that had "the" in front of it, I would buy. Well, except Yachts, because they didn't have "the" in front of it. But Yachts was a band that I did. The Undertones, Buzzcocks, the Clash, of course, I eventually got into. The Records, the Bram Tchaikovsky. No, that's not right. That's just Bram Tchaikovsky. But anyway, so I was buying that stuff, and then, of course, this album comes along, approximately the same time. And this is the third album. This was really the breakthrough album for the Jam. This is called All Mod Cons. This is the deluxe edition, the deluxe 2 CD edition. And this album just took This Is the Modern World, that sort of crisp, in-your-face, wonderful pop sound, and just took it to the next level. You know, added more layers to it. And absolutely stellar album. Of course, you know, To Be Someone and It's Too Bad and Down in the Tube Station at Midnight, just all great songs. Actually, the only song I really didn't care for too much was David Watts, which is a cover version of a Kinks song. I thought the originals were better than that. But this was just a mind-blowing album. This is the album that kick-started the mod revival in the UK. Without this album, we may not have gotten the Lambrettas and the Chords and Secret Affair and Squire and Purple Hearts, or at least they wouldn't have been as popular. But Ahmad Khan's is a fantastic album that really took them to the next level. Next album was Setting Suns. Setting Suns was even more layered than anything that they had done. I don't want to say it's a darker album, but it's definitely a much more mature album. Filled with great songs, Eating Rifles and Girl on the Phone and Thick as Thieves, and lots of great things on this album. I loved it to death. In fact, when I went into Licorice Pizza one day, I was a bigger Jam fan than the Clash. So the new album rack there at Licorice Pizza had Setting Suns and London Calling. And I chose Setting Suns. Now, of course, to this day, I think London Calling is a better album than this, but still I don't regret buying it. Don't regret buying anything by the Jam. See, because they were releasing singles, not album A and B sides, around, in between all these albums, and they're all collected, as bonus tracks. But Setting Suns, darker, slightly darker album, still melodic. Started life as a concept album, and they abandoned that idea a couple songs into it. But it's still a great record. Maybe you can tell that the pressure of trying to follow up Ahmad Khan's was weighing on Weller's mind, so he sort of went a little slightly different direction, but it was just as good nonetheless. Next up came a single called Going Underground, which was #1 single. The Jam were the biggest band in the UK, and of course Sound Effects came out. Great story behind this, real fast, is Christmas 1980. This was released in the UK, and it made it over to the US import copies because it hadn't been released here. So I asked for it for Christmas, and I couldn't wait to figure out if I was getting it for Christmas. So about a week before Christmas, I went through my parents' closet and opened all the little things that had albums just to make sure I got it, and I did. So anyway, Sound Effects is another great record. Strips away some of the layers that Setting Suns had, and it's a much more positive sounding record. Now, of course, Paul Weller's dealing lyrically with very serious issues, but musically it's a lighter album, not as dense as Setting Suns was. And of course, it's got great stuff like Start, which everybody knows because it's got that Taxman bass riff on it. But I'm Different Now and Monday and Pretty Green and lots of great songs on there. Man in the Corner Shop. This was a very fine album indeed. I was very, very, very happy. Then along comes The Gift, which was a huge stylistic change for the band. It was still definitely the Jam, but it was a different sound for them. They used a new producer, Peter Wilson, who I think had produced like Sham 69 and a few other bands. But this album here, it added more of a soulful feel to it. There was horns on the album. There was a funky track on the album. Like, we're talking straight ahead funk called Precious. And of course, this is the album with Town Called Malice, which was an ode to the great Motown sound. And while this whole album isn't great, I mean, the title track is kind of weak, and so is Transglobal Express. The rest of the album is solid. Just great stuff on it. And there were some great singles that were released before this and after this. And they've all been added to here. Things like The Bitterest Pill and Beat Surrender and all that fun stuff. But this was a great Jam album, completely different. See, that was the thing. They were all kind of different. You knew that they were the Jam. You knew the minute Paul Weller started singing, it was the Jam. But they were constantly exploring music. And that's what I really liked about them. It wasn't the same thing. Like with the Stranglers, the first 3 or 4 albums, it was the same exact thing over and over again, which was great, but it was also great when they changed it up too. But the Jam remain a band that just obliterated any barrier that I had in my mind and made me just start listening to everything out there and trying to find what I wanted to listen to, not what other people were forcing on me. And that was the great thing. For a while, the Jam were my band. I didn't know anybody that liked them. I didn't know anybody that listened to them because everybody in my high school, they were sort of exploring their own things too. But yeah, for a while, the Jam were definitely my band. The band I'd always talk about. People go, never heard them, never heard them. This album here is really the album that K-Rock picked up on. K-Rock picked maybe 4 songs off this album to play on concert rotation. So anyway, that's it. I'm just going to talk about the Jam. None of the compilations or the live releases, or none of the solo Paul Weller or Bruce Foxton records, or the Time UK, which was Rick Buckler's band. I'm just going to talk about the albums. The Jam, still a band that is near and dear to my heart. They changed the way I listen to music. Because of the Jam, I got into things like power pop and new wave and stuff, because they just made me just open my eyes and ears to a whole new world. And so I hope that you maybe dig into your collections and pull out your Jam records or CDs and play them, or you rush down to your local record shop or hop online and buy whatever you can. The Jam, I highly recommend every single thing here. If you want to play it safe, there's no bad Jam compilation because they all basically have the same material. So definitely check them out. The Jam, highly recommended. And that is it for me in this episode. And I just want to close by saying, my name is SPAZ, and I'm a CD junkie. Thank you for watching. Smell you later.